really gotten a lot of attention. They showed some concept vehicles, a truck at the LA Auto Show, and has just made a lot of noise lately. And this really amplifies that.
They told you EVs were the answer. Now even the creators are jumping ship. This wasn't some fringe startup. This was Tesla. This was Rivian, the poster children of the new world. And they just killed their own momentum. Abruptly, quietly, with no answers. You think this was about chips, about batteries, or something else behind the scenes. Canceled supplier contracts, internal leaks, and federal investigations that haven't been made public yet. Because the real crisis isn't the shutdown, it's what it reveals. The day the lines went silent, they told us it was just a pause, but nothing came back online. That's how it started at the Rivian plant in Normal, Illinois. 1 minute, the line was rolling. The next, every worker's phone lit up with the same group text at 4:15 in the morning. All shifts temporarily suspended. More info to come. No explanation, no hotline, just silence. People waited outside the gates thinking it had to be a glitch, but it wasn't. The factory never reopened. The parking lot emptied out by the next shift, and by the weekend, there were rumors flying around town that no one wanted to believe. Inside the plant, they'd seen the warning signs: battery delays, software bugs, parts arriving later than usual. Still, nobody expected a total freeze. This wasn't a startup scraping by. Rivian had raised billions. It had White House photo ops. It had promised to change the future of American trucks. And now it was a ghost. Local businesses that depended on the factory's income started pulling back hours. Daycare centers, auto repair shops, and diners all felt the hit. There was no severance, no warning, just a hard stop and a sick feeling that what had been built in Illinois was being dismantled somewhere else. And just like that, what had once been the pride of the Midwest was swallowed by silence. But in Texas, things didn't go quiet. They went nuclear. Tesla's panic button. The order came without warning, and once it hit the floor, nothing could stop it. At Tesla's massive Giga Texas facility, the shutdown felt less like strategy and more like a controlled demolition. Elon Musk sent the message out through internal channels just after midnight. Pause all Model Y production. Managers didn't have time to ask questions. They were told to reallocate personnel and make the lines go still. It was instant. Conveyor belts stopped. Forklifts idled, and the thousands of workers across shifts were left to stare at machines that still blinked but didn't move. Plant had been a symbol, Tesla's anchor in America's electric future. But as the reality of the order settled in, that symbol cracked. On the production floor, engineers were told to report to research staging. Contractors were sent home. Supply trucks were diverted mid-route, and the cafeteria, once overflowing with workers, cleared out before noon. Behind closed doors, the reason was brutally simple. Demand had softened. Tariff costs were rising. Critical components were stuck in transit or now too expensive to justify. And the longer the line kept moving, the more money it lost. Elon didn't explain. He acted. And in doing so, Giga Texas, once the crown jewel of American electric manufacturing, became its most vulnerable liability. And if that sounds like a private decision, just wait. Because the real trigger didn't come from California or Texas. It came from Washington. Tariff shock. The trigger. No one survives. President Donald Trump's decision to impose a sweeping 25% tariff on imported electric vehicle components and fully built vehicles sent shockwaves through the industry. At first, it was pitched as protection, an America-first approach to bring manufacturing back home. But it didn't land on Beijing or Berlin. It landed squarely on Detroit, Austin, and Normal. Companies like Rivian and Tesla, which depend heavily on global partners for battery packs, chips, and software components, were suddenly bleeding money. A lithium-ion battery pack that once cost $6,000 now came in at over $7,500. Chinese semiconductors jumped in price. Even Canadian aluminum and Korean electronics faced inflated duties. The economics of EV production, already fragile, were collapsing. Spreadsheets inside Tesla and Rivian weren't showing thin margins. They were showing deep, fast losses. And the panic wasn't theoretical, it was measurable. At the policy level, some warned the administration early. The tariffs weren't just inconvenient, they were destructive. But Trump doubled down, insisting that companies should have already been building entirely in the United States. Except they couldn't. The supply chains weren't ready. The infrastructure wasn't there. And so the tariffs, instead of restoring industrial power, were triggering an industrial retreat. As the financial strain mounted, one company stepped back before the market even realized realized what was happening, and what they didn't announce said more than anything they could have. This isn't just about EVs, it's about trust, money, and the American middle class hanging by a thread. If you feel that, hit subscribe, because the next collapse is already loading. Rivians Vanishing Act. They raised billions, made promises, and disappeared when it mattered most. From the outside, Rivian still looked like a rocket ship. Branded Amazon vans rolling through cities, social media videos of silent pickups rolling off futuristic lines. But inside, everything was changing. Projects were canceled, model timelines erased, supplier agreements pulled back. There was no press release, no press conference, just contracts that were never signed, calls that stopped getting returned, and parts that stopped getting ordered. Investors started noticing it first. Factory utilization dropped, hiring froze, R&D was gutted. Product expansion, once the cornerstone of Rivian's long-term vision, was shelved indefinitely. And then there were the people. Engineers reassigned to core functions, software teams consolidated, mid-level managers let go in quiet waves, never mentioned in quarterly updates. To the average observer, it looked like belt tightening. To those closest to the boardroom, it looked like controlled retreat. One early investor, who had publicly championed Rivian for years, privately confessed the roadmap was being shredded from the inside out. Nobody wanted to say it on record. Nobody wanted to be first, but the consensus was emerging. Rivian wasn't trying to win anymore. It was trying to survive the storm. What came next, though, wasn't silence at all. It was noise. And it started with labor. Union versus Billionaire. The United Auto Workers had been trying for years to get their foot in Tesla's door. Every attempt had been stonewalled, undercut, or laughed off. But this time, things were different. When the shutdown hit Giga, Texas, hundreds of Tesla workers suddenly found themselves with nothing to lose. That's when organizers moved in fast, not with threats, but with facts. You build the most advanced electric cars in the world, one field lead told a group of technicians. But when they shut it down, you didn't even get an email. In Fremont, in Austin, even in Buffalo, long-standing union resistance started to wobble. Workers weren't asking for more money. They were asking for information. They wanted contracts, timelines, accountability. Elon Musk's usual defense, direct access to leadership via Twitter, rang hollow. You can't tweet your way through a layoff. You can't meme your way past unpaid rent. Tesla scrambled to contain it. Middle managers were told to schedule one-on-one coffee chats. HR teams began sending vague updates about strategic adjustments, but the damage was already done. The workers had found their voice. And they weren't just angry, they were organizing. UAW leadership saw the moment for what it was, an opening. For years, Tesla had positioned itself as a tech company, not a car manufacturer. That distinction kept unions at bay. But when the factory floor turned cold and the break rooms turned quiet, those lines began to blur. These weren't just engineers, they were workers. And Elon just turned one factory into a battleground. Yet the labor fight wasn't the only battle brewing. Behind the scenes, supply chains were being quietly redrawn, far from American soil. EV dreams made in Mexico. As tariffs began tearing through balance sheets, both Rivian and Tesla made a brutal, strategic pivot. It didn't come with press releases or media coverage. It came through revised invoices, redirected shipments, and canceled component contracts inside the U.S. factories in Mexico. Suddenly saw new orders. Battery pack integration units, once built in Nevada, were reassigned to Jalisco. Aluminum chassis suppliers in Monterrey received last-minute increases. Even software calibration was being outsourced to technical offices in Guadalajara. The companies didn't say they were offshoring, but that's exactly what was happening. Tesla leaned hard on its existing relationships with foreign suppliers, leveraging speed and lower labor costs to keep production feasible. Rivian followed suit, quietly routing new parts of its assembly model into international zones beyond tariff reach. Internally, they called it load balancing. To the communities in Michigan and Ohio watching orders disappear, it looked a lot like abandonment. Executives in logistics were given a clear directive: cut costs fast and avoid exposure. That meant fewer U.S. partners, more tax havens, and more facilities in places where 25% tariffs didn't apply. Publicly, the companies remained bullish on American production. Privately, they were triaging. The EV revolution, we were told, would create new jobs for a clean energy future. And it did, for a while. But as the numbers stopped adding up, those promises were quietly packed up and shipped south. and the future they promised here is being built somewhere else. That silence was finally broken by a single email, one that hit Wall Street like a slap in the face. The email that broke Wall Street. The email wasn't even meant for the public. It was flagged internal only. A routine production update sent to regional leads at Tesla and Rivian. But like most internal documents in volatile times, it leaked. Within 24 hours, Bloomberg had it. The next morning, CNBC broadcast it. And by noon, $7 billion had vanished from the EV sector. The markets weren't reacting to a shutdown. They were reacting to what it symbolized. Non-core operations is executive language for anything not generating immediate profit. That meant R&D. That meant innovation. That meant expansion. Tesla was freezing not just production, but progress. Rivian was stalling not just growth, but identity. Stockholders panicked. Analysts started slashing target prices across the board. Calls flooded in from pension funds and institutional investors trying to make sense of what was happening. These were the two companies that had been hyped as America's answer to China's dominance in electric vehicles. Now they were circling the wagons, hoarding cash, and hoping to survive the quarter. For companies that built their value on narrative, on future potential, the market's reaction was swift and cruel. When you sell hope, the minute it's in doubt, you lose everything. And in one day, $7 billion in value disappeared. But this wasn't just about the markets. Because when a movement built on optimism starts collapsing from the inside, it doesn't just take money with it, it takes belief. And the cracks were only beginning to show. When the parts stopped coming, we didn't lose a customer. We lost a lifeline. That's how one parts supplier in Elkhart, Indiana described it. For years, their machines stamped brackets and battery mounts for electric trucks built by Rivian and Tesla. Their workforce wasn't large, just over 100 people on 2 shifts. But the orders came like clockwork, or they used to. Then one Friday, the call came in. The schedule had been reassessed. No new deliveries were needed for at least 3 months. No reason given. No backup plan. The ripple effect was instant. Workers were sent home. Contracts with raw material providers were canceled. Local banks, which had extended credit lines for expansion, began dialing the phones. There's no safety net in manufacturing towns like these. Just families, mortgages, and a sense that the assembly lines built into America's economic DNA had just been severed. The silence from automakers made it worse. No one at Rivian returned calls. Tesla's logistics portal just said, "Orders delayed." By the time vendors understood this wasn't a delay, it was a collapse. It was too late to pivot. Other customers couldn't absorb the excess capacity. Some suppliers had already been running on fumes after the last interest rate hike. For them, the shutdown was the final blow. And across Indiana and Ohio, the same phrase kept echoing. Not a customer lost, a lifeline cut. And it's not just machines were shutting down, it's families. But while factories slowed, another crisis was already boiling over, one that played out not in the warehouse, but on the sales floor. Dealers on the edge. Just last year, floor space was the most valuable asset these dealerships had. Rivians and Teslas were waitlisted. Buyers were placing deposits, and the energy felt untouchable. But that optimism evaporated in a matter of weeks. As shutdowns rippled across production, customers didn't get more desperate. They got more afraid, and afraid buyers don't shop. They cancel. Dealers who had over-leveraged themselves to expand EV showroom space are now trapped with unsold inventory. Thousands of dollars in interest ticking upward every day on unsold vehicles. Floor plan financing, once a temporary bridge between delivery and sale, is now a source of crushing debt. The cars aren't moving. The loans are still due. And it's not just financial. Salespeople are quitting. Service departments are scaling back. Marketing budgets have dried up. Trade-ins that used to cover the cost of new leases are now underwater, especially on used Teslas, which have seen their values plummet by more than 20% in some regions. And worst of all, many customers are feeling betrayed. They were sold a promise that EVs were the future. Now they feel abandoned with no infrastructure, no confidence, and no clarity. Every day the floor plan loan ticks, and the losses grow. But while dealers fight to stay above water, policymakers in California are confronting an even bigger disaster: the collapse of their electric vision. California's electric utopia shatters. The state positioned itself as the global vanguard of electric transportation for years. Mandates were aggressive. Incentives were generous. Grid investment was ambitious. But none of it prepared them for a world where the EV industry itself was buckling under its own weight. With Rivian and Tesla pulling back production and demand collapsing at dealerships, the math underpinning California's entire electrification strategy no longer adds up. Grid operators were counting on new demand from EV charging to justify multi-billion-dollar expansions. Utilities were banking on high adoption rates to cover infrastructure subsidies. Environmental legislation had been written around the assumption that by 2035, gas-powered vehicles would be effectively obsolete. But the vision of a zero-emissions future is colliding with a very real breakdown in trust. EV registration rates are flatlining. Charging infrastructure is behind schedule. Local utilities are warning of summer blackouts, while thousands of state-funded charging stations sit half-completed, frozen by budget gaps caused by declining tax revenue from shrinking auto sales. And the most painful irony, the very automakers California relied on, Tesla and Rivian, are now the ones unraveling the plan. The policies were ready, the targets were set, but the supply chain cracked, the sales dried up, and the faith that powered the electric revolution has curdled into fiscal fear. What started as a green revolution just triggered a gray recession. And while California scrambles, one man is using the chaos to draw his own line in the sand: Trump's cold calculation. As auto executives scrambled, President Donald Trump's team saw opportunity. By framing EVs as the symbol of globalism, of failed promises, Chinese dependencies, and Silicon Valley arrogance, Trump found a new wedge issue with real political voltage. And he used it. The 25% tariff wasn't just a reaction. It was a message. To the Rust Belt, to Detroit, to every voter who had watched jobs vanish, Trump could now say, "I punished the tech elite. I brought the pain to the companies that forgot about you." It was never just about imports. It was about identity. And in Trump's world, EVs represented the wrong one. Campaign ads are already rolling out. Images of shuttered Rivian plants, clips of Elon Musk's erratic tweets, and small-town job losses laid against the backdrop of an industrial decline narrative. For voters in Michigan, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, it is working. The message is simple. America lost its way trying to save the world. Now it's time to save America. And while Democrats scramble to defend green policy in the middle of an industrial panic, Trump is consolidating support. He doesn't need Rivian or Tesla to win. He just needs them to bleed, loudly, visibly, and consistently, so that every layoff becomes a talking point. Because it was never just about trade. It was about power, the EV that no one can afford. It was supposed to be a breakthrough moment for the Martins, a middle-income family in Tucson, Arizona. After years of saving and research, they were ready to make the switch from a 10-year-old gas SUV to something electric, practical, and future-proof. They picked a Tesla Model Y. It had great reviews, government incentives, and an aura of modernity that seemed worth stretching for. But when they applied for financing in April, the deal collapsed in seconds. Higher interest rates, a rising base price, and reduced state subsidies meant the car was now effectively out of reach. And they are not alone. Across the country, working-class buyers who once thought they were on the verge of E5 ownership are being priced out entirely. Just 2 years ago, entry-level electric vehicles hovered near $40,000. Now, with tariffs, material surcharges, and dealership markups, even affordable EVs often clear $48,000. For lenders, the calculus has changed too. Financing a vehicle with high depreciation risk, uncertain resale value, and limited charging infrastructure feels like bad business. Canceled reservations have become the norm, not the exception. Buyers who waited months for a promised delivery are now walking away as monthly payments balloon past what their budgets can bear. Families that once believed they were participating in the future are discovering they have been priced into the past. And when they visit the showroom today, the electric vehicle that was supposed to transform their lives, it is still there, untouched. Because now the only EV left is a trophy behind glass. And the company that once made them believe in that trophy, it just hit the brakes on its future. Tesla's roadmap just crashed. We spent 5 years building tomorrow, then watched it get deleted in one meeting. Inside Tesla's Palo Alto engineering campus, the whiteboard had been covered with Sharpie dreams for years. New platforms, refreshed models, AI rollouts, and long-range batteries that would reshape the way America drove. But during a closed-door meeting earlier this spring, all of that got wiped away. Literally, Elon Musk walked in, listened to 2 minutes of budget forecasts, and ordered a complete roadmap freeze, development halts, staffing pauses, resource reallocation. The future was officially suspended. What followed was chaos. Entire teams, some of them responsible for the long-teased $25,000 compact Tesla, were told to refocus on short-term value. Cybertruck software teams were merged into generic cost control task forces. Several suppliers were informed that their production agreements were being reviewed for viability. Internally, staffers weren't shocked by the pivot. They were gutted by how fast it happened. This wasn't about setbacks, it was about survival. Every new model that had once been greenlit now came with a trailing asterisk, contingent upon macro conditions. Tesla, for all its dominance, was bleeding margin. The Model S and Model X had already become niche products. The Model Y was stagnating. And the Cybertruck? No firm production commitments, no new supplier timetables, and no confirmed build window for the rest of the year. What had once been Silicon Valley's most ambitious auto roadmap now looked like a risk management slide. The innovation pipeline didn't dry up, it was shut off at the valve. Because when the market turned, Tesla's future wasn't redesigned, it was redacted. And if that sounds harsh, ask the people who put their hearts into the brand. Their silence now says everything. The brand that lied to its own believers. For fans of Rivian, this wasn't just a company. It was a movement. Early adopters didn't just want the R1T, they wanted to be part of something meaningful. A greener alternative. A smarter truck. A brand that made you feel good about owning a vehicle again. When deliveries began in 2022, forums exploded with photos, stories, and glowing praise. The waiting lists stretched out for months, and for a while it felt like Rivian might actually pull it off. But beneath the surface, the company was already shifting. Promised software updates slowed. New feature rollouts were postponed indefinitely. Service delays multiplied. And then came the real blow. The disappearance of transparency. Customer support lines went dark. Vehicle production numbers weren't updated. And as economic pressure mounted, Rivian's communication grew vaguer by the week. Buyers who had put down early deposits found themselves staring into an abyss of pending configuration timelines and pricing structure revisions. The goodwill that had built over years began to fray. One customer who had flown across the country just to test drive their R1S posted a viral video. "I believed in Rivian. Now I feel like a fool." It wasn't just a bad delivery schedule. It was a broken promise. The backlash didn't come from rivals or critics. It came from believers. People who wore the shirts, posted the hashtags, and turned their garages into EV shrines. Now, they are canceling orders, reselling vehicles, and walking away because the loudest supporters didn't just feel abandoned. They felt betrayed, and that betrayal is now feeding something even more dangerous. A collapse in faith in the entire vision of American EVs. The future we almost had. We built the battery of the future. It's sitting in a dark warehouse. David had spent 7 years working on a breakthrough solid-state battery. He was part of a small team in Michigan that had been funded to develop the next-generation energy tech that would supposedly leapfrog everything on the market. It was safer, cheaper, and promised a longer range. In early tests, the results were astonishing. Investors toured the lab, press releases were drafted, job postings tripled. Now the prototype sits in a temperature-controlled crate, unshipped and untouched. The facility was downsized last month. David was let go. The reason? Market uncertainty. Because the truth is, even the best technology can't outrun economic fear. And for all the talk of innovation, investment, and energy independence, the plug has been pulled across the board. It's not just David. Dozens of engineers, analysts, chemists, and systems designers who had been laying the groundwork for America's next industrial surge are sitting idle. Programs have been slashed. Battery pilot lines are being converted into research pause zones. And the quiet exit of investors from early-stage energy innovation firms, it's accelerating. This isn't just about jobs. It's about momentum. The psychological contract between tech optimism and real-world execution has been shattered. Americans weren't just promised cars. They were promised transformation. They were told that the future would be made here, by them, for them. Instead, the future is stuck in limbo, and the people who built it are stuck in unemployment queues. Which part of this collapse hit hardest for you? Was it the workers, the investors, or the silence from the companies that promised change? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe to stay ahead of what's next, and thank you for watching till the end.